Hey, what is going on, folks? This is Hellbent, and welcome to AutoHotkey mini tutorial number 30. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at the list box, how you add it, and a few of the different ways you can use it. It's been about 4 months since the last time I did a tutorial, so I'm very rusty. I had planned on going through and creating a lesson plan and following that, etc., but because it's been so long since I've done a tutorial, as soon as I started doing that, I started wanting to go and do something else instead. So instead of chancing that it might be another 4 months before I do another tutorial, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to wing this one. This topic is something that I've used several times in my own scripts, so I should be able to wing it okay. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I don't get too long for this video to be too long, so I will run. There we go. I'll run a little stopwatch so I can keep track of how long this is going. Okay, so let's just jump into it. If you're using this, you should be at least somewhat versed in how to create a GUI, so that not everything that I'm going to be doing is brand new to you, but I will try to explain what I'm doing as I go. So I have a script, I've set it up in a folder that I want to have, and I'm just going to go ahead and type out the script. So the first thing I'm going to do is at the top of the script I'm going to do single instance force. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in a GUI. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to add an option at first, and I'm just going to do always on top, just so that way it stays on the top while we're working on it. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of the GUI to make it stand out a little bit more, because I know that on the screen, if I have a gray GUI, it'll be a little bit harder for you to see it. So I'll change the color to black. And I'll come back to the color options in a few minutes, because there's some other things we can do with the list box with the color option. The next thing we'll do is we'll just go ahead and add in our list box. So I'm going to do GUI add, and then the name of the control, which is list box, and then the options. So there's a bunch of different options that we can use. We can position it, we can size it, etc., and I'll just go over a couple of those real quick. So all I'm going to do with this one here is I'm just going to position this list box on the margin, so the X margin and the Y margin, and you can change the margins above this and whatever. I think I've done a tutorial on that before. So I'm just going to do XM for the X margin, YM for the Y margin, and now the size. Now, I can let it size itself, but usually if you're creating a interface or something, you have very specific amount of space that you want to give to certain controls, so you don't want it just giving it as much space as it wants. So it's usually better if you control the size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to size the width of it to 200, and the height I'll come back to in a few minutes, because there's something else that we can do. But for now, what we're going to do is, instead of specifying the height, what we're going to do is we're going to specify the amount of rows. So the list box is, in many ways, it's very much like a drop-down list where you'll have a list of options that you can select between, but it has a few different things that separate it from that, and we'll go through that as we go through the lesson. So one of the differences is with a drop-down list, it just basically shows the first item, and then you hit the side, the arrow, and then it'll show you all the different things. With this, what we can actually do is, in addition to having the arrow where we can select other items, we can actually specify how many of the list. So let's say if the list is 20 items, we can specify that we want to have all 20 of them showing at the same time. And we can do that by typing R for rows and then the number of rows that we want to have shown. So let's go with 10 rows. We're probably not going to add 10 items to this thing, but we'll add 10 rows anyways. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to associate a variable with this. This is going to keep track, so that way when you select an item in the list, afterwards it's going to store that thing that you selected into that variable, and then you can use that the value of that variable for whatever you need to later on. So we're just going to type V for variable, and then I'm just going to call this list1. Now I've mentioned this a million times before, but I'll mention it again. Always name your variable something that makes sense. Sometimes you can use generic names like list1, list2, list3, etc., but it's generally speaking, it's better if you have a very specific name. Perhaps the name of the variable has to do with what that list contains. But for this purposes, a variable list1 is fine. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this to a label or a subroutine. You don't have to do this. There is ways around that. For example, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this to a label, and then each time we select an item in our list, it's going to trigger that subroutine, and it's going to update that variable with that value. Or maybe it'll pop up a message, or maybe it'll do this or that. Right? But what you can also do is, rather than attaching a label here, what you can have is, so let's say if you have lots and lots of different options, you have check boxes, radio buttons, edit boxes, you have list views, etc., list boxes. Perhaps after you filled out all of that, at the very bottom of your interface, what you can have is maybe a button it'll update all the values at that one time, rather than doing it each time you interact with the interface. I personally like to, unless I specifically don't want it to update each time I interact with the interface, I usually will add in that each time, every time I press a button or press a checkbox or radio, I'll have it update at that time, because sometimes I'll have a program that's running at the same time as I'm doing these interactions, and I want it to actually update right away. So usually, unless I absolutely do not want that, generally speaking, I personally always attach it to a label. So I'm going to type G for go to or go sub, and I'm going to call the label, I'm just going to add a generic thing. I'm going to call it submit all. Okay, so like I said, there's a bunch of different options that we can use, but for now we'll just get a list on the screen. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of the options by adding a comma, and now I'm going to manually enter in a list here, and I'll go over some of the other ways that you can add a list afterwards, because a lot of the time adding your lists inside of where you're building your GUI isn't what you're going to want to do, especially if it's hundreds of lines of code. You really don't want to have a big list inside of things that you want to be going through and making changes to as you're building it. But for this purposes here, we're going to just use a very small list, so putting it right in here is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, let's go with some colors. So I'm going to add in some colors. So blue, and now what I need to do is to delimit it so that way it knows that blue is one item, and then I'm going to add in another item now, and the next item will be on the line below it. So I'm going to do red, and then a pipe, and let's go green, and then a pipe, and one more, yellow, and then a pipe. Okay, so that's fine for now. Let's go ahead and show this. So GUI show. For you know what? I'll size it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it. I'm going to position it so that way it's a little bit out of our way. I'm going to position it over here. So I'm going to do, my screen resolution is probably going to be different than yours, but so my width is 1366 or something like that pixels wide by 700 and some odd pixels high. So I know approximately where I can position it, but you might not be able to use the same positioning that I'm using. So I'm going to do X, let's go 800, X800 and Y100. So it's going to display it over here, and I'm going to set it a width of 500 and a height of 500. So this way I can add more controls to it afterwards. I don't need to give it a name, so I'm fine with that, and then I'll just add in a return. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that way when we hit the X at the top corner, it closes out of the script for us. So I'm going to type in GUI close, a colon, and then I'm going to do exit app. As with most things that I do, I always add in an emergency hotkey. In this case, we really don't need it, but it's a what I consider a best practice to, if you can add in an emergency exit, then you might as well add it in. So I'm going to do, I'm going to do, darn, I don't know what the hotkey for this is. You know what, I'm not going to add in a hotkey. I'm not going to add in an emergency hotkey because I don't know what I have as this for this one. So, but generally speaking, when you're making a script, if you can add an emergency exit, add in an emergency exit. Especially if especially if it's taking control of your keyboard or your mouse, you definitely want to have an emergency out. So I think we have enough to run the script now. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back over here. And what did I? Parameter 1. Line 5. Oh, you know what? I forgot to add in this label. So since we put this here, I actually need to come down to here and actually create that label or that subroutine. And for now, all we're going to do is, we'll get it to pop up a message that tells us which one of these items we selected. So the first thing we need to do in order for that to happen is we need to update the variable that's associated with whatever we select. So the first thing we're going to do inside of here is type in GUI, submit, and then no hide. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pop up a message box, and we're going to just, like I said, I haven't done, not only have I not done any tutorials in 4 months, I haven't done any scripting in 4 months. Message box, and we will display the value that is currently stored in list 1. So when we select our list, if we select blue, it'll put blue into this variable. If we select red, it'll put red into that variable, etc. And then we will return. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. We shouldn't have any more errors, hopefully. Okay, so here we go. And we have our list. Like I said, it's kind of like a drop-down list, but it's because we've set the amount of rows to show at 10, it's going to show all the things that are in our list because our list isn't that long. But if our list was 20 items long, it'll show the first 10, and we'll be able to scroll down to the other items that are in our list. We can actually show that right now. So I'll change this to show 3 of them, so it'll show up to the green, and then everything else will have the arrow. So it's showing the first 3 items, and then we can use the arrows to scroll down. And if we added more items, the scroll bar would get longer. Let's go back to 10 because it's nice, big. Okay, and like I said, we've attached this to a label, so that way when we interact with this, it's going to trigger this subroutine here that's going to update that variable with whatever we select, and then we're going to pop up that message that tells us. So let's go ahead and select yellow, and we get a message that says yellow. And because the message is sitting underneath the GUI, what I'm going to do in here is I'm also going to type in GUI and plus own dialogues. This way the graphical user interface owns any dialog boxes that pop up, so our message will sit on top of our GUI, and it won't allow us to interact with our GUI until we close that message box. So let's run that again. If I hit yellow, it pops it up on top now, and it tells us what we selected. And if I try to select this, it won't let us until we close this dialog box. If we hit select green, it'll tell us that green is in there. Okay, perfect. Let's say that when we run our program, we want it to start off with one of these items already pre-selected. The way we do that is by, instead of just having a single pipe after the thing in our list, what we're going to do is we're going to double the pipe. So let's say we want to have green as the item that is default selected. We'll just add in an extra pipe there. And now when we run it, green is going to be selected. Okay, so green is pre-selected. Let's say that we don't want to use pipes as our delimiter. What we can do is, before we create our list, before we add in our list control, what we'll do is we'll type in GUI and then plus delimiter. And then right beside it, with no space, we'll add what we want to be our new delimiter. So let's do an asterisk. So we're going to change the delimiter from being the pipes to an asterisk. And now we have to go through this and actually change that. We'll make it red. We'll make red as the thing that's selected this time. And if I run this again, now red is the thing that's selected and the asterisk is our delimiter. Back to color. If for whatever reason you don't like the background color here, what we can do is in the GUI color options, after the first parameter here, we add in another comma and then we can change the background. Now this background, whatever we put in here, is going to affect all of our list boxes and all of our edit boxes or edit fields. So unless you want them all to be the same, don't bother, just leave them as they are, right? So for example, if I want it to be if I want the background to be yellow, there we go, right? But like I said, if we have multiple list boxes or edit fields, etc., they're all going to be yellow. And even if I was to try to, let's say, after this, try to change it to something else, it's going to be the last thing that we added in, the last color that we added in here is going to be all of them. It doesn't matter if we put yellow there and then red here, it's going to be still, all of them are going to be red. Okay, there is ways that you can do it where each individual thing has its own color, but there's a lot of scripting involved in it. You can check it up on the forums how to do it, but in my opinion it's not worth it. There's other ways that you can do those kind of things without actually having to go through the process of what they'll show you there. With everything in programming, there's usually multiple ways to skin a cat, and that's just one of those things that you can do. Okay, let's see. Another thing that is good about list boxes is that you can select multiple items. So let's go over how you can select multiple items. So let me show you an example that I have here of another script that I have that actually uses list boxes. So this one here is just to basically a shortcut to create this code for another project that I was working on, and all of this stuff here is list boxes. So for example, if I want to use different kinds of controls, text control, edit control, checkbox, blah blah blah. Beside that, I have a bunch of different options that I can select. So in here I only want to select one item at a time, but with the options I might want to use multiple of the options. So I have it set up so that way I can add background trans, I can add centered, border, read only, group, etc. So I can have multiple things selected at once. Okay, so that is that. Now let's go over how to do that. So there's two ways that we can go about doing this. One is where we have to press a key in order for us to select multiple items, and to do that we just type in multi in the options. Now, I think that's right. And then in order to actually select multiple items, you have to hold Control when you select it. So if I just want to select one item and just change items, I just normally select it like normal. If I want to have multiple items selected, I hold Control and then select another item. So here I can select 2 items, 3 items, all 4 items. And if I want to turn any of them off, I can just select it again. The second way where I can make it so I can select multiple items without actually having to do the modifier or pressing Control or Shift while I'm selecting them is to type in the options, the number 8. And now I don't need to press Control when I select the other items. I can just go through them and select them as I want. Okay, so that's selecting multiple items. Let's do updating the. No, let's do sort. Now, I personally do not recommend using sort, and there's specific reasons why I don't like using sort, and that is because I usually use the AltSubmit. So I usually use the position of these items rather than what the item says. But let's go over the sort anyway. So let's say if I want to have these in alphabetical order rather than just whatever order I type them in, all I do is in the options I just type in sort, and now when it pops it up, it'll put them in alphabetical order. Right, so you can see that red and green have been swapped. That is sort. There's a few other things I think you can do with sort. I don't remember them because, like I said, I don't use sort that often. Actually, I almost never use sort. The next thing is AltSubmit. So with the way that we have it right now, every time we update this variable here gets updated with the value that is on this. So if I select blue, it'll be updated with the value blue. If I select red, it'll have red, etc. Now, for me, often I'll often have things that are combined. So this list here might actually be just like a shorthand phrase for something. So let's say if I'm creating a document or something like that, and I want to have a section that has, let's say, a paragraph worth of stuff in it. Rather than me having a paragraph of stuff in here, what I can do instead is I can have a keyword or something like that that says, okay, I want to have that item. So I'll have 2 lists. One list is the shorthand terms like blue, green, red, and then the second list will have the extended paragraph of whatever I want to have, or a bunch of different items that I want to have. And I'll have the 2 lists will be paired by their position. So if I select the item that's in the first position, it'll trigger the item that's in the second list that's also in that first position. So to do that, to use the position rather than the value, rather than the value, what we'll do is in our options we'll type AltSubmit. So AltSubmit, like I said, rather than it storing the value of the item, it'll store its position instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this 8 so that we don't have to select. We're not going to be selecting multi anymore. And then we'll go ahead and run that. And now when I hit blue, rather than it saying blue on our message box, it should just say 1 or 0. I think 1. So 1. If I hit yellow, it'll say 4. And now I can pair this with a second list. So I'll do up here list 2 and down in here when we select that, rather than it popping up a message box saying that, what we'll do is, like I said, I haven't done any coding at all in 4 months, so here's list 2, and we will if the value of item 1 equals a index, temp variable equals a loop field. Okay. And then we'll print out temp var. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, if I want to have it paired with another list, so I'm just using these as shorthand or whatever. There's multiple ways that you can use this, but in this case I'm just going to pair a longer string with a shorter string. So if I have, like, let's say each of these are a paragraph long, they're not just one word long, they're a paragraph long, or however many things that I want to have, then I can just use a little shorthand thing, blue, red, green, and then pair that with what I actually want to have as my output. So hopefully this should work. So we'll go ahead and save this and run it. And now when I hit green, instead of it popping up in our message box green, it should say item 3, I think. Oh, it didn't do... Oh, what did I do wrong? List 2. Let me see. Oh, I see what I did wrong. It's not item 1, it's list 1. Okay, so if I hit green, it should be item 3. Right, and like I said, I can have this to be... no, I don't want to use that. I can have it to be... Hopefully this works. Instead of it saying item 3, it can say that. Hopefully I didn't have any problems there. So when I hit green, it gives me, instead of me typing it out in my list here, I can have it as part of a second group. And then when I select the item that corresponds with the same index number, it'll work out that way. Okay, so let's see, what else can we do with this? Let's go to a few different ways that we can actually add a list into this, because like I said, there's going to be lots of times where you're not going to want to have your full list inside of your, where you're building your GUI. You're going to want to have it outside, just like up here with this up here. So we can create a variable. So for example, in this script here, I have a list of all the different fonts that are available. And where is that? Did I close that? So here I have a list of all the different fonts that are available, and obviously I'm not going to want to have this list sitting here where I'm trying to build my GUI. So instead I have it up at the top as part of a list. And to add that, all that we need to do is just take the variable name, and we'll add a %, and then a space, and then our variable name. If I want to add, no, I'm thinking of something else. But there we go. That's it. So if I want to use this list here in here, that's instead of the blue, green, red, that's all I do is I just create my list up here as part of a variable and then put it into here. So now, oh, we changed the delimiter. So let me change that delimiter back. Okay, let me undo a few things. Okay, let's say that we want to have two list boxes. The first one we want to have as the delimiter as a asterisk, but then afterwards we want to change the delimiter again to be something else. So let me copy this line. Control, yeah, okay. The hotkeys, Control D. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same GUI delimiter. Now, usually there's a way of doing it, changing things back to the default just by typing in like a blank space, like comma, or like, for example, if I changed the font, if I wanted to change it back to its default font, instead of adding any of the extra parameters like the color, the size, etc., I would just type in GUI font, comma, and then that's it. And that'll reset it back to its default. I'm not sure with delimiter because I don't usually use delimiter, so we'll just check to see if that's how it works. So I just typed in GUI plus delimiter, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe that'll change it back to being the pipes. Oh, I have the same variable twice, so I am going to call this list XX, whatever. And what I need to do, my bad, what I need to do is get rid of this Y margin. Okay, there we go. List 2. Oh, forgot to put that as a variable. Okay, so there we go. So as you can see, by just typing in GUI and then plus delimiter without anything after it, it set it back to being the default, which was the pipe. But if I want to, I can change it to whatever I want. I can change it to comma, I can change it to whatever I want. Actually, I probably suggest you don't use comma, but who knows? You probably can use comma. Let's go with, I did notice, just before I did this, I went over the documentation. There's really not much in the documentation. I'm covering a lot of stuff that's actually not in the documentation. But one of the things I noticed was the tab stops. Now, I understand how that works with the edit box, and I assume when I get to list views, I understand that how it'll work with that. I'm not sure why exactly you would want to have tab stops in this kind of control, but who knows, maybe there is a valid reason. So let's go ahead and go through that. Now, I've never tried this. This is my first time ever trying this, so I'm only making assumptions on how it's going to work. So if it doesn't work the first time, then you're on your own to figure out how tab stops work, which is probably something you're never going to actually use. So if we want to add tab stops, so tab stops are basically if we want to have columns, for example, right? If we want to have a column for, let's say if I have above each of these list boxes, let's say if I have text above it that specifies what kind of column, so product name, product ID, the amount that we have in stock, blah, 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 right? We can sort it like that. I don't know why you would use this kind of control for that kind of thing, but who knows? So what we'll do is I'm just going to try it, and I'm going to do T for tab stop, and I'll add some space so it's clear, and then the amount of space that we want to have between the different tab stops. So now how I assume that it will work is that in my list, if I add a tab into my list, it's going to use the tab stops. So we will do 40, a tab of 40. And in here, instead of using a space, I'm going to press tab. And like I said, I'm only assuming that this is how it's going to work. I really do not know. Okay, and we will see. So we should see the 1 and the 2 tabbed over about 40 spaces from the edge. Maybe. And there we go. Okay, so we've created different tab stops, and let's get rid of this stuff here, so that way we can explore that a little bit better. So item, now you can assume that this item number is text above it rather than inside of the actual thing. So tab and name and amount. Item number, here, let's, okay, amount. Okay, so there we got 2 items, and we'll just pop this up. So it should be item number, and then a tab stop of 40, and then the name, another tab stop of 40, and then the whatever. And there we go. And we can get this a little bit wider, so it all fits in. So there we go. We can create columns by using tab stops, and we can specify the amount of distance. So for example, if I want the second item to be, let's say 40, and I'll do 65. Damn, I'm gonna have to change so much to do that. So how it works is, if I just have one tab stop in there, all of them are going to be separated from the beginning to the next one at 40, 40, 40. If I add multiple in here, it's going to be from the edge. I think it's how it works is from the left side. The next item over will be, so the first item will be at 40, and then the next one will be at 65. And then whatever, if I add more, it'll go on from that. But each of these, I believe each of these items is working from the left edge rather than the beginning of the item that's before it. And I don't know. Let's try. Okay, anyways, you can play around with it and you'll figure it out, no problem. Like I said, I don't know why exactly you would want to have it set up like this inside of a list box, but maybe you have a use for that. The next thing is back to the beginning. I said where usually when you're creating an interface, you want to have very specific sizes for different controls. Now perhaps you might have some items, you might change the font later on or whatever. Perhaps you want to specify the exact amount of space for the height. So let's use the first one, and instead of using rows, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use height instead, the height and number of pixels. So let's say if I was to pick 23, no, let's go with 27. If I was to change the height to 27, it's automatically going to go to the height of the rows. So even though I specify in pixels, it's still going to go to the closest thing to that in rows. So let's say, for example, if I go to 33, it'll probably be up to 2 rows now. So it's up to 2 rows. But if I change this to 30, let's say 37, it's still going to be probably just 2 rows. Right? What if I actually want to use height to specify the exact height rather than in the number of rows? To do that, in the options, I type 0x100, and I think that's right. and now it'll use the exact height in pixels. And what's going to end up happening is it's not going to look as nice, because often you'll end up having one of these items with half of the name cut off or half of the item cut off. Like in this example here, green is only part of green is showing. But this allows us to specify the exact height that we want this control to be, regardless of whether it looks like shit or not. So that is the option 0x100, or the hex code 0x100. Next, let's say we want to add a new item into our list. So we have our list, but for whatever reason, sometime during the process of it, we want to add a new item. Now, I'm not going to go into how to save that, because afterwards, if you want it to be that thing that you added, the next time you run it, you're going to have to save that to a file. The list to a file, obviously, because otherwise the next time you run it, that item that you add is going to be gone. But I'll just show you how to add a new item anyways. So let's go ahead and add a edit xm new item. I don't like lowercase next to my variable, and we'll attach this to a label we'll call add new item, and I think we are good there. So I'll just create a label or a subroutine to do that. What I'm going to do is, because I don't want it to update as I'm typing it out, there's a few ways that I can do this. One is, instead of adding my label into the edit box, what I can do is instead add a button, attach this label to that button, and then when I'm done typing in the edit box, I can press the button and that'll update the list. Or what I can do, actually, you know what, I haven't done this in so long. Like, I almost never use this option, so I'm not sure if this is exactly how it works. But, I'm I don't think this is going to work. I'm thinking of adding in want return, but I don't remember. Like I said, I don't use that usually. So I'm not sure if want return is going to do what I think it does. I'll do it. I'll try it anyway. So I'm going to type in want return. So hopefully what I'm hoping is going to happen is, instead of it triggering this label every time I type something in, hopefully it's going to wait until I hit that return, which I don't actually think this is going to be the way it works out. It's going to wait until I hit return before it actually updates the thing. So anyways, we'll do our GUI submit. I don't think this is going to work. If it doesn't work, then I'll just I'll add the button. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add the value we end up getting in our edit box that we've created. We're going to put that into our list. So to do that, we're just going to type in GUI control. The first parameter, or their subcommand, we're going to leave blank. The second one is what we're going to be updating, and the thing that we're going to be updating is our let's update our second list. So we're going to update our second list. So the variable that's associated with that is list XX. And what are we going to update into that? We're going to update the value that's in our edit box, which is called new item. Okay, and return. We're going to get rid of this label so we don't get the message box each time we interact with that. We have it for the first one. We've already displayed how the submit all, or how this all works, so we don't need it again there. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And now let's see. Okay, so obviously want return isn't doing what I want it to do because it's updating as I type in. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this label out of here, and instead what we'll do is we'll add in a button, and the button is going to be what actually executes this. I'll separate those a little bit so you can see them. So all I've done is I've just added a button, positioned it. I'm going to let it auto size itself, so it's just going to be a small little button, basically just big enough to fit in update. And as soon as you press the button, it's going to trigger that label. So that way it's going to wait until I finish typing out what I want to add before it updates into the list, rather than adding a new item each time I type in a character. Okay, so there, this is the new item I want to add to my list. If I hit update, it gets added to my list. If I want to add another item, and so on and so forth. And like I said, if I want to actually save this so that way the next time I run this script, I would actually have to save the value of this list into a variable, and then perhaps put that into a text document of some sort. Let's see. There was a few other things I want to do on this. I'm trying to remember. If I miss anything on this, sooner or later I'm going to be coming back to all these tutorials and do a redo of them. So if there is something that I miss in this tutorial, if any of you are actually still at this point, because most of you walked away already, let me think. Yes. Where I was adding. So here we have a variable that we're adding it in. What if I have a text document and I want to load that text document? Now, like I said before, there's multiple ways that you can skin a cat. I'm just going to use the first thing that comes to mind. So I'm just going to create a. Let me. I'm going to create a text document. Oh. No. I was hoping I wouldn't have to navigate to that folder, but it seems that I am going to have to navigate to that folder. AutoHotkey Tutorials. Okay, so here's our new text document. And all I'm going to do is inside of this text document, I'm going to take that list that I have here. Darn. No, I don't want to use this because it's not structured well enough to be added to a list. So I'll just use this. I'll just use this, whatever. You know, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen the tutorials where I covered doing files, so I'm not going to bother doing that. It's just a waste of time. But anyways, at the beginning when you load up your script, you can load that text document and or whatever kind of document you have, store that into a variable, and then display that variable that you got in your list here. So instead of this being a list that I've typed out right here, instead it's grabbing from a text document and storing that into a variable. Let's do one last thing and then we're done. Let's make it do something. Let's make our script do something, which most of you will already know how to do right away. I don't have to show you anything with this, but let's make it so that way if we interact with our first list here, let me change this back to being 10 rows tall. So let's say if I actually want these to act kind of like a button, like maybe this is a list of programs, and as soon as I click on it, I want to run that program. Alright, so if I hit any of these, then we're going to do blah blah blah. So what I'm going to do is inside of this, I'm just going to leave all of this here, but I'm not going to be using any of this really. But I'm just going to use this label. So because this label is already attached, so that way when I interact with it, it does that stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if list1 equals, right now I'm using AltSubmit, so I'll do it both ways. So I'm going to do it with AltSubmit, which is the position. So this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Right? So I'm going to say if the thing that gets stored in that variable is equal to 3, then what we're going to do is we're going to try to run. Now I'm using try because I don't want the thing to error out. So if you're doing something that you know that there's a possibility that it could error out, just use try instead. So that way your script doesn't crash on you. So I'm going to try to run cal calculator.exe. And actually what I'll do is I'll change green to just so it looks more like what I want. So I'm going to, if I hit the green, it's going to try to run that program. So if I hit blue, it does just the message box. If I do red, it does just the message box. If I do yellow, it just does the message box. But if I hit calc.exe, it's going to do the message box, and then it's going to run the calculator. Knock on wood. So message box, and then it ran the calculator. Okay, so that's how we can get it to do, actually have it do something. Right, and we can have it do anything we want. So we can have it save a file or etc. etc. Here, let's do run calculator exe and we'll have it move the mouse. So if I hit calc.exe, we get the message box, then it's going to run the calculator and move my cursor. And there we go. That's it. That's it for this tutorial. Hopefully by the next tutorial I'll be back to having a structured plan that I can run through a lot quicker than in 52 minutes. But like I said, I need to get the rust off, so blah blah blah. Okay, peace.